The banging echoed faintly through the basement door, soft, rhythmic, desperate. At first, it was barely noticeable, lost beneath the noise of the late evening storm that had rolled in over the cul-de-sac, rattling windows and sending wind chimes into a frenzy. But as the seconds passed, the knocking grew faster, more frantic, like someone was trying to scream through their fists. I didn't even wait for the police to finish clearing the front hallway. I pushed past the officer holding the radio, ignoring his command to stand back. My heart was thundering louder than the sirens. I raced down the narrow wooden stairs, the scent of mold and bleach thick in the air. The basement was pitch black, save for the sliver of light breaking through the doorframe and the distant pulse of red and blue from the cruiser outside. My hand trembled as I gripped the knob, but it was locked, bolted shut from the outside. From the outside, I shouted her name, Hazel, and then again, louder, panic shredding my voice as I pounded on the door. And then, faintly, I heard her. A tiny voice, hoarse and afraid. From the other side, Mommy? That's when I broke. I threw my shoulder into the door once, twice, a third time, until it cracked at the hinges and splintered open. The stench hit me first, damp, stale air mixed with dust and something sour, like rotting laundry. I flicked the light switch, and nothing happened. Burn out. I pulled out my phone, the flashlight barely cutting through the shadows, and there she was, curled into herself at the far end of the basement, knees hugged to her chest, her little wheelchair overturned beside her. She looked smaller than ever, her sunflower print dress wrinkled and dusty, legs trembling beneath her. I rushed to her, dropping to my knees, and pulled her into my arms. She flinched at first, disoriented, her voice cracking. I was good, Mommy. I was quiet like she said. My chest collapsed inward. Her skin was cold. Her hair matted. Her face streaked with dried tears and dust. Who did this? I whispered, though I already knew. By the time I carried Hazel upstairs, the EMTs had arrived. They wrapped her in thermal blankets and checked her vitals as I tried to explain through the tears, through the rage that made my hands clench and unclench uncontrollably. She had been missing for almost 4 hours. For hours since I had frantically called the police, posted in every community group, driven in circles through the neighborhood, screaming her name out the car window. Karen had been there the entire time, right across the street, sipping tea on her porch, offering fake concern, pretending to help. She probably wandered, she had said. Kids like that get confused. And now here we were. A paramedic asked me how long Hazel had been locked in the basement. I didn't know. I didn't want to imagine. Her lips were cracked. Her voice was a whisper. And yet, somehow, she kept asking the same thing over and over. Did I do something wrong, Mommy? I couldn't answer her. I just held her hand tighter, because the truth was too sick to speak. When the officers approached Karen's house, she didn't resist. She didn't run. She didn't even look surprised. She stood at her front door, in a neatly pressed cardigan, arms folded, watching everything unfold as if it were an inconvenience. They asked her calmly, had she seen Hazel? Had she been inside her house? And Karen, with her flat eyes and perfectly painted lips, answered without blinking, she's in the basement. She needed somewhere quiet to calm down. It's for her own good. Those words, those 7 venom-laced words are burned into my memory like the searing touch of an iron. It's for her own good. I lunged, but the officers held me back. My screams didn't even sound like my own anymore. Hazel was being loaded into an ambulance, and the woman who had locked her away, like some unwanted thing, was standing under the porch light with not even an ounce of regret. What kind of monster thinks locking a disabled child in a cold, dark basement is for her own good? And what kind of world allows someone like that to be put in charge of the very community meant to protect families? This wasn't the beginning of our nightmare. This was the moment it surfaced, and what came next would uncover a darkness in that neighborhood that ran far deeper than one basement, one door, or one twisted woman named Karen. Before Hazel was born, I used to believe in the illusion of control, that if you planned things carefully enough, dreamed hard enough, worked long enough, you could build a life that was safe, predictable, stable. And for a while I did. My husband, Nate, and I had spent years saving for a dream home, working long shifts, skipping vacations, and living frugally just to get there. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepares you for what it means to raise a child with a disability. Hazel came into this world 7 weeks early, her tiny body weighed down by challenges she hadn't even had a chance to understand. Doctors diagnosed her with cerebral palsy before her first birthday. The muscles in her legs were too tight, her motor control too fragile. Walking was never in the picture, and speaking, even with years of therapy, remained limited. But what Hazel lacked in mobility or verbal fluency, she made up for in spirit. She was curious, joyful, compassionate, the kind of child who could sense someone's sadness without a single word spoken. So when we finally found the house in Willow Creek Estates, it felt like destiny. The neighborhood was quiet, nestled on the edge of town with wide sidewalks and newly paved roads, ideal for Hazel's chair. The house itself had a wide ramp already installed, and a sunroom that faced east where morning light poured in like gold. It was everything we had prayed for: a fresh start, a safe community, a place where Hazel could feel like she belonged. We signed the contract the same week we toured it, blind with hope, too eager to notice the warning signs we'd come to regret. From day one, Karen introduced herself as the friendly face of the HOA. She rang our doorbell the morning after we moved in, handing us a glossy binder filled with rules, regulations, and her signature on the welcome letter, written in perfect cursive. She wore a pink floral blouse and white slacks, her hair styled like she'd stepped out of a catalog. Her smile was too perfect, stretched too tight, the kind that didn't reach her eyes. She spoke slowly, deliberately, like a kindergarten teacher. You'll find our community is very traditional. We just ask that everyone fits in. At the time, I brushed it off as formal neighborhood lingo, the sort of thing retired women who love garden parties say, without meaning much. But as time would show, Karen meant every word. Fitting in wasn't a suggestion, it was a demand. At first, her interactions were harmless. She dropped off fresh banana bread, complimented our landscaping, waved from across the street. Then she started making little suggestions. You might want to repaint your ramp. That shade of blue doesn't match the HOA's palette. Or, Hazel is such a sweet girl, but have you considered using one of those silent wheelchairs? The noise might startle our senior neighbors. We tried to laugh it off. We didn't want conflict. We thought we were just adjusting to a tightly run neighborhood. But things escalated when Hazel started using her adaptive speech tablet outdoors. She loved to sit on the porch and play with her communication device, pressing buttons that made it speak short sentences like, "Hi, I'm Hazel," or "Mommy, look." It was her voice, her connection to the world. But apparently, Karen had opinions about that too. She knocked one afternoon while Hazel was playing on the porch and said, "The constant beeping is a bit much. Maybe she can do that inside." That was the first time I felt it, the shift from polished politeness to something uglier, something colder. I replied with a tight smile and said Hazel had every right to be outside. Karen didn't argue. She just looked at me expression blank and said, "We all want what's best for her." Then she turned and walked away. What followed was a series of passive-aggressive notes, folded letters left on our porch or slipped into our mailbox. Reminder: sidewalks must be kept clear of obstruction. Noise policy enforced between 3 p.m. and 6 p.m. Residents must seek board approval before displaying unsightly furniture. We were never sure what counted as unsightly: Hazel's sensory swing, her therapy chair, or simply the fact that she existed in a space where she wasn't expected. One day, Hazel had a mild episode, a sensory overload from the wind chimes clanging too loudly in the neighbor's yard. She panicked, cried, tried to crawl back inside. I rushed to calm her, holding her in the driveway. Karen stood across the street, arms folded, watching like we were a disruption to her perfect world. She didn't ask if we needed help. She didn't look concerned. She just stared. Soon, other neighbors began keeping their distance. Conversations felt shorter, colder. Someone left a note on our car windshield, maybe this isn't the right neighborhood for your kind of family. Another person called code enforcement because our Halloween decorations had unauthorized blinking lights. They were motion activated pumpkins for Hazel. That's all. Karen had planted the seed, and now the garden of judgment was blooming. She began showing up unannounced, just checking in, she'd say, peeking past me into the house. Once, she asked if she could speak to Hazel privately. I refused, and she smiled again, that strained, sugar-coated grin that felt more like a warning than a pleasantry. I noticed her at odd times. Watching. Always watching. She took pictures of Hazel's therapy setup in the yard, measured the distance between our ramp and the flower beds, took notes on a clipboard. It felt like surveillance disguised as community care, like she was trying to gather evidence that our existence was a problem to be solved. Still, we tried to live peacefully. We tried not to give her a reason. We filed a complaint to the HOA about harassment, but the board dismissed it. Karen's just doing her job, they said. She's passionate. Passionate, it seemed, about control. Things truly crossed the line the day she invited us to a community family brunch. We politely declined. Hazel had therapy that morning. But later, a neighbor mentioned that Karen had introduced herself at the brunch as someone who helps manage special needs families in the neighborhood, as if we were a project, a box to be handled. I was furious. I confronted her the next day. She denied it, but again, her words lingered. Some people need more structure. You'll thank me one day. I remember feeling like the walls were closing in, not because of one woman's cruelty, but because of the apathy that surrounded it. No one stood up. No one said enough. We were being isolated inch by inch, and all of it hidden beneath the false charm of HOA unity. But Hazel didn't see it. She still waved at neighbors, still gave drawings to Karen in childlike kindness. She's lonely, Hazel once told me. She wants friends. That innocence broke my heart, because behind those smiles, Karen was already planning something darker. She didn't just want control of the neighborhood. She wanted control of us. And soon, she'd find a way to get it by taking Hazel where no child should ever be taken and locking her there. It began subtly, so subtly that at first we didn't even recognize it for what it was. A neighbor with concerns. A woman offering help. A community that smiled while it quietly closed its doors. Karen's shift from neighbor to something else, something controlling, invasive, almost predatory, happened like a slow drip. A single drop doesn't seem like much, but over time it becomes a flood. Not long after we'd settled into our new routine, Karen started appearing more frequently. At first, it was under the guise of friendliness. She'd knock holding cookies or leftover muffins from her neighborhood committee meetings. She'd wave from across the street while we pushed Hazel around the block, always with that same stretched, too perfect smile. But soon, her small talk shifted into observation. Then judgment. Then suggestion. She began commenting on how we cared for Hazel, how long she stayed outside, what kind of food we gave her, the volume of her speech device. I hope you don't mind me saying this, she said once, her voice honey-sweet, but sometimes when Hazel's tablet speaks late in the evening, it echoes through the cul-de-sac. Poor Mr. Jenkins next door is very sensitive to sound. We apologized, not wanting conflict, but Hazel had only been outside until 7 p.m. It wasn't loud. It wasn't even unusual. Karen knew that, but she was planting seeds, quiet ones, about us, about Hazel. The following week, she stopped by with a clipboard and what she called a suggested household improvement list. It wasn't an official HOA notice, just her personal thoughts. Among the bullet points were notes like remove wind chimes, store therapy swing indoors when not in use, and consider adding shrubbery to shield wheelchair ramp from street view. Shield it from view, as if Hazel's ramp, her gateway to freedom, was offensive decor. I started noticing her car parked across from our house at strange times, not just during the day, but in the early morning, too, before sunrise. Once, I stepped onto our porch and saw her inside her vehicle, windows up, staring at our front door. When our eyes met, she looked away, started her car, and drove off slowly, like she hadn't been caught, only interrupted. Then she started asking to come inside. "I'd love to see the layout," she said more than once. "You've done such a great job with accessibility. I just want to learn more, in case other families move in someday." At first, I allowed it. I was polite, thinking she truly wanted to understand, but her visits grew increasingly uncomfortable. She took photos of Hazel's medical equipment, asked if we were really trained to use all that. She inspected Hazel's bedroom, poked at her blankets, asked to see her emergency medications. "You keep these unlocked?" she questioned once, frowning. "Have you ever had a parenting course for children with neurodiverse challenges?" That's when I stopped opening the door. But Karen found other ways in. She began speaking with other neighbors, many of whom had been friendly to us initially. Soon, their smiles turned hollow. One couple, who used to bring their son over to play board games with Hazel, suddenly stopped responding to texts. When I finally caught them outside and asked if something was wrong, the mother looked away and mumbled, "We just want to stay on good terms with the HOA." A week later, we received our first official HOA violation: overuse of front yard equipment. It referred to Hazel's swing, sensory tent, and wheelchair-accessible garden bed, all of which had been approved in writing before we moved in. I submitted the documentation. The violation was reviewed and reissued with a different clause: disruptive appearance to neighborhood uniformity. Hazel noticed the tension, too. She began asking questions. "Why don't the neighbors say hi anymore? Why does Miss Karen always frown at me?" One night, while tucking her in, she whispered, "Did I do something wrong?" I wanted to lie to protect her, but I just kissed her forehead and said, "You're perfect. Sometimes people are just wrong." Then came the dog incident. Hazel had a trained therapy dog named Maple, a gentle golden retriever who had been by her side since she was 5. Maple never barked, never jumped. She'd lay beside Hazel's chair like a guardian angel. One afternoon, Karen approached us while we were in the front yard and asked why we didn't have Maple on a leash inside the fenced property. I explained that Maple had been trained for indoor and outdoor responsiveness and never left Hazel's side. Karen smiled and said, "That's lovely, but some people are frightened by large animals. You can never be too cautious." The next day, animal control showed up. An anonymous complaint had been filed claiming our dog was uncontrolled and aggressive. The officer apologized. Maple greeted him with her usual gentle nuzzle. The report was closed on the spot, but the message had been delivered. Karen was watching us, testing us, trying to build a case. And when she couldn't find anything real, she invented it. A few nights later, I found her standing in our yard. It was after 10 p.m., and Hazel had fallen asleep hours ago. I had stepped out to lock the mailbox when I saw her silhouette near the garden bed. When I called out, she didn't flinch. She turned slowly and said, "Just checking your side yard lighting." "We've had complaints about shadows making people uncomfortable. On whose authority?" I asked, my voice sharper than ever before. Her smile faltered for the first time. "I just care about safety, especially for Hazel. A child like her could easily wander." That sentence, that threat, sent ice down my spine. I told her to leave. She stared for a second too long. Then she turned and walked away like she hadn't just crossed a line. From that point forward, we kept our doors locked at all times. We installed motion lights. We set up new cameras with cloud backups. But no security system could shield us from the quiet war she was waging, a war fought with subtle lies, with whispered fears, with carefully documented concerns cloaked in the language of protection. And worst of all, no one in the neighborhood stopped her. Karen didn't raise her voice. She didn't break windows or scream threats. She just made sure everyone doubted us. Made sure Hazel looked like a liability. Made sure that eventually no one would be surprised if something happened to her. Because when you isolate a family long enough, surround them with silence, strip them of allies, the groundwork is set. And soon, that groundwork would become the very basement floor beneath my daughter's trembling hands. By the time fall arrived, Karen had evolved from nuisance to predator No longer content with petty complaints or passive stares, she began targeting Hazel directly and with a disturbing sense of purpose. What once felt like overreach was now a full campaign, methodical and cold. I saw the shift in her eyes from disdain to obsession, like she'd made it her personal mission to remove us from her perfectly curated neighborhood. And she didn't come at us with screaming or violence, she came with whispers. She came with paperwork, rumors, and a smile that masked her malice like porcelain over rust. The first sign came one morning in the form of a letter from Child Protective Services. Anonymous concern regarding your daughter's care, it read. My stomach dropped. I held the paper as if it were on fire. It listed vague accusations, neglectful supervision, potential emotional harm, non-standard living conditions. None of it true, all of it terrifying. A caseworker came to our house that afternoon. She was kind, thankfully, and within moments saw that Hazel was not only safe, but deeply loved. Our home was clean, adaptive, designed for Hazel's mobility and security. The case was closed the next day, but the emotional damage? That lingered. Hazel asked why a stranger wanted to see her room. She asked if she was bad. I told her no, of course not, but inside, I knew exactly who had made the call. Karen had crossed a line, and she had done it under the mask of righteousness. That's when the manipulation became bolder. We began receiving strange glances from new neighbors, people we had never met, who now looked at us like we were unstable. A mother at the park quietly took her son's hand and moved away from Hazel's swing when we arrived. When I asked if something was wrong, she hesitated and muttered, I just heard things from the board. The board meaning Karen. She had been spreading lies, that Hazel had outbursts, that she was dangerous, that we let her wander unattended, that I left her alone for hours with loud electronics and an aggressive dog, that our home was unstable. It didn't matter that none of it was true. Karen didn't need proof. She just needed repetition. In a tight-laced neighborhood like ours, whispers move faster than facts. Then came the HOA violations in rapid fire, 5 in 1 week. Unpermitted modifications to front lawn. Violation of sound ordinance. Improper display of non-neutral colored toys. It was Hazel's garden, her communication speaker, her wheelchair left near the porch overnight. We appealed them all. We had documents, approval letters, photos, but the board, now under Karen's full influence, rejected each one. I watched that month's HOA meeting from a distance, standing outside the community center with Hazel beside me, and I saw how Karen led the conversation. Calm, confident, smiling politely as she told the gathered residents that some families require firmer guidance for the good of the community. I watched several nod. Others didn't meet my eyes. One man, Mr. Ellison, whose wife had once brought Hazel a handmade sweater, turned away as we passed. Karen's most dangerous move came next. She started befriending Hazel. Not in a warm, grandmotherly way, but in the twisted way someone grooms trust. She started waving to Hazel every time we went for a walk. She'd leave chalk drawings on our sidewalk with Hazel's name. One day, Hazel rolled up to me excitedly and said, Miss Karen gave me candy. I froze. When? I asked, just now, she said, pulling a piece of peppermint from her pocket. She said Karen told her it was just for her, because she was special. I checked the wrapper. It was sealed, but that wasn't the point. I called Karen immediately and told her to stay away from my daughter. Her response was syrupy and insidious. I'm sorry if it upset you. I only meant to be kind. She seems so alone lately. You must be very overwhelmed. She hung up before I could answer. I started documenting everything, every encounter, every violation notice, every offhand comment. I bought a new security camera and installed it above Hazel's window. I took screenshots of online HOA group posts where Karen made vague references to certain households needing intervention. But the more I fought back, the more Karen doubled down. One afternoon, she called animal control again, this time claiming Maple had chased a delivery worker. We had video footage proving otherwise. Still, an officer showed up, asked questions, and left me with a warning. Someone's clearly trying to build a case, he said quietly. Be careful. You're being targeted. Hazel started retreating inward. She asked to stay indoors more. She stopped using her swing. She began stimmying again, a repetitive rocking motion she hadn't done in years. I caught her whispering to herself in bed one night, repeating Karen's name in short bursts like she was trying to make sense of her confusion. Miss Karen said the sun is too loud. Miss Karen said I talk too much. Miss Karen said good girls don't bang their tray. Karen had been talking to her more than I knew. Then came the emergency board notice. It was delivered in person, a folded letter with an urgent tone. It claimed Hazel's presence near the street posed a liability risk. It requested a temporary in-home adjustment plan for her outdoor activity until the board could review solutions for community safety. In other words, they wanted us to keep Hazel inside. It wasn't a request. It was an order disguised in suggestion. I called an attorney the next morning. I was done playing polite. I sent cease and desist letters to the HOA. I reported Karen to the Department of Fair Housing. I filed complaints with the city. But Karen wasn't deterred. If anything, she seemed energized by the resistance, as if I had just proven her right. I overheard her on a community walk saying to another resident, "You see what I mean? When they feel threatened, they lash out. That poor little girl, if only someone had stepped in earlier." She was rewriting the story, casting herself as protector, painting me as unstable, Hazel as unsafe. She didn't want us gone, not just yet. No, Karen wanted to win. She wanted the world to agree with her twisted belief that Hazel was a problem, that I was a failure, that she and she alone was the solution. And then one day, Hazel vanished. Just 10 minutes. I left her on the porch in her chair, watching the sky like she always did, while I ran inside to get her meds. When I came back, she was gone. No sound, no sign, no explanation. Just an empty wheelchair, and the sound of wind chimes clanging on Karen's porch. It started like any other quiet afternoon. The sky was soft and overcast, the air still with that familiar pre-storm stillness, and Hazel had just finished her afternoon sensory session. She loved this time of day. The light wasn't too harsh, the breeze felt gentle against her face, and she could sit on the porch in her chair and just exist. I set her up in her usual spot, next to her potted herb garden and her weighted blanket, her communication tablet resting on the side tray, her therapy dog, Maple, curled up beside her feet. She was content, calm, safe. 10 minutes, I told her. I'm just grabbing your meds from upstairs. She nodded, tapping the OK Mommy button on her device, and turned her face toward the sky, the corners of her lips twitching into the beginning of a smile. It was one of those quiet, almost sacred moments, the kind you don't realize you'll want back until everything changes. I walked inside, not even taking my shoes off, and ran upstairs to the medicine cabinet. It couldn't have taken more than 6 or 7 minutes. I came back down, humming, carrying her small bottle of antispasmodic medication, already planning to make her a cup of warm tea. I opened the front door and froze. Her chair was empty. The weighted blanket was on the floor. Her tablet was gone. Maple was barking furiously toward the street, her tail stiff, pacing anxiously. At first, I thought maybe Hazel had rolled toward the side of the house, maybe chasing a butterfly or trying to peek around the fence. She'd done that once before. I rushed to the side yard. Nothing. I circled the back. Nothing. I called her name once, then again louder. Hazel? Hazel, baby? My voice cracked on the third call. Maple followed me, nose down, circling frantically. My pulse began to pound in my ears. I ran to the driveway, looking up and down the street. No sign, no sounds, just stillness. And then something cold and dark crept up my spine. She's not here. She's gone. I dialed 911 with shaking fingers. My voice was trembling, almost unrecognizable as I reported a missing child. She's 8. She uses a wheelchair. She can't walk on her own. She was on the porch. Now she's gone. The dispatcher's tone turned serious instantly. Units were dispatched. I hung up and ran door to door, banging on neighbors' homes. Some answered, some didn't. Most looked startled. A few offered to help. One man stepped outside and began checking his backyard. And then there was Karen standing on her porch as if nothing was wrong. Her arms were crossed, a mug in her hand, brows furrowed like she was mildly inconvenienced. "What's all the fuss?" she called out. "My daughter is missing." I snapped, breath ragged. "Have you seen her?" Karen's expression twisted into a performance of concern. "Oh no, not Hazel. I thought I saw her rolling toward the cul-de-sac earlier, but maybe I was mistaken." I stared at her. Something was off. Her voice was measured, her body too still, and her eyes weren't scanning the street. They were watching me. Police arrived within minutes. They moved quickly, canvassing the block, knocking on doors, collecting descriptions. They asked me for a recent photo. I showed them Hazel's last birthday picture. I kept saying she can't walk. Someone would have to take her. One officer raised the possibility of abduction. My legs nearly gave out. Another asked if we had any family in town. I shook my head. She wouldn't go anywhere willingly. She's scared of strangers. She would have screamed. But no one had heard screams. No one had seen her. Until someone did. It was Mr. Boyd, a neighbor from 2 houses down. He said he'd gone around the side of Karen's property, trying to peek into her backyard for clues, when he heard a soft, repetitive thumping sound, like fists against wood. Faint, desperate. The officers and I ran with him, pushing past hedges and stepping into the narrow space between Karen's house and her garage. The basement window was small and half covered in ivy, but if you listened closely, you could hear it. Knock, knock, pause, knock, knock. I dropped to my knees. "Hazel!" I shouted. From the other side of the glass, muffled by layers of concrete and fear, came the sound of her voice, hoarse, cracking, the mechanical rasp of her tablet just barely audible. "Mommy, help! Dark, cold." I screamed. Officers demanded access. Karen, still on her porch, acted confused. "I don't have a basement," she lied. They didn't wait. 2 of them broke through the back door and rushed down the narrow steps. I tried to follow, but another officer held me back. I was sobbing, begging, shaking uncontrollably. Moments later, they emerged, carrying Hazel in the arms of a female officer, her body wrapped in a tattered blanket, her cheeks tear-streaked, her eyes wide and glassy from shock. She was alive, but she was shaking violently, her lips turning blue, her fingers clutching her tablet, like it was the only solid thing left in the world. They loaded her into the ambulance. I climbed in behind her, holding her close, trying not to cry in front of her, failing anyway. "I'm here," I whispered. "I'm here, baby. You're safe now." She looked up at me, and with barely any voice left, she said, "Miss Karen said it's a timeout, that I was too loud, that it's for my own good." I went still. Time stopped. Those same words Karen had used before, about everything from the swing to the therapy dog to Hazel's voice, had become her justification for locking my disabled daughter in a pitch-black basement alone, without food or water, in silence for hours. And she'd done it under the delusion that it was discipline. At the hospital, Hazel was treated for mild hypothermia, dehydration, and severe emotional trauma. The pediatrician said she was lucky. Had she remained another hour in that cold, uninsulated room, the story could have been very different. I couldn't bring myself to sleep that night. I sat beside her bed, watching her breathe, brushing her hair back, silently promising that I would never let anyone hurt her again. Karen was taken into custody that night. Not for the crime itself, not immediately, but for obstruction, lying to law enforcement, and endangering the welfare of a child. She didn't fight. She didn't cry. She simply turned to the officers and said, with a chilling calmness, she was unstable. Someone had to protect the neighborhood. That phrase became a wound I still carry. Because Karen didn't see Hazel as a child. She saw her as a disturbance, something that needed to be corrected, contained, silenced. And she believed she had the right to do it. In the days that followed, our story exploded. Local news, national networks. Outrage poured in from all over the country. Parents, advocates, disability rights organizations. They called Hazel brave. They called Karen a monster. But through all the noise, all the headlines, one truth rang loudest of all: what happened to Hazel wasn't just evil. It was allowed. It was enabled. By silence. By indifference. By a system that let Karen hide behind HOA power and weaponized rules. Hazel was found. But what we uncovered next would shake the entire community to its core. Because this wasn't the first time Karen had hurt someone. And unless we stopped her, it wouldn't be the last. The hospital lights were too bright. The beeping machines too loud. Hazel flinched every time a nurse entered the room, her body tightening like she expected punishment instead of care. I sat beside her, clutching her hand, my eyes never leaving her face. Her skin was pale, her lips cracked, her voice barely a whisper. And even then, only when necessary. She didn't cry. She didn't ask questions. That scared me more than anything. My Hazel, who once asked 1,000 curious things a day, who used her speech tablet to tell me jokes she barely understood, now said nothing, just stared ahead, her eyes glazed and silent. The doctor said her vitals were stabilizing. That physically she'd be fine. But trauma wasn't something that showed up on an X-ray. It lived in her silence, in her trembling, in the way she clung to her stuffed dog like a lifeline. When the therapist came in, a kind woman with warm eyes, Hazel recoiled. She buried her face in my shirt and tapped her tablet with shaking hands. No strangers. No basement. No more Karen. I held her tighter. How do you explain to your child that the woman who smiled at her across the street, who gave her candy and drew hearts in sidewalk chalk, was the same woman who locked her in darkness and called it protection? Meanwhile, the world outside moved at a cruel, disjointed pace. While we sat in that sterile room, shattered and shaken, Karen was already spinning her narrative. News broke almost immediately, and within hours her lawyer gave a statement to local media. This was an unfortunate misunderstanding stemming from deeply misinterpreted intentions. Mrs. Simmons has always prioritized community safety and took temporary custody of the child out of concern for her welfare. Temporary custody. Concern for her welfare. I read those words again and again, barely believing they were real. Hazel wasn't misplaced luggage or a lost pet. She was a living, breathing child, my child who had been locked alone in a cold, dark basement for nearly 4 hours. And now, the woman who did it wanted to paint herself as the hero of the story, the savior, the misunderstood guardian. Worse still was the initial police report. It called the incident a potential misunderstanding involving unclear custodial boundaries between neighbors. No arrest, no charges, no emergency removal from the HOA board. Karen returned home the next day, waved to a camera crew from her porch, and declined to comment further due to ongoing legal review. I watched it on the hospital TV while Hazel slept beside me, and I felt the kind of rage that doesn't scream, it smolders, quiet and deep. The kind that doesn't want revenge, only truth, justice, accountability. Because if a woman could imprison a disabled child and walk free with nothing but a lawyer's excuse and a spin doctor's polish, what did that say about the world we were living in? I tried to push the system. I went to the station. I brought pictures, footage, transcripts from Hazel's device, her tapping out help dark, cold, Karen. I gave them our camera logs, the timestamps, the emergency call log. I demanded they stop calling this a dispute. But the officers looked uncomfortable. One finally said, "We're not saying nothing happened, but in legal terms, it's not a slam dunk. No sign of physical injury, no forced entry, and Karen's claiming consent." Consent? My voice cracked when I responded, "You think my 8-year-old disabled daughter consented to being locked in a basement with no lights, food, or access to help? He wouldn't meet my eyes." That's when I realized they weren't unwilling to help. They were afraid. Karen wasn't just a neighbor. She was president of the HOA, sister to a retired judge, donor to the city council. She wasn't just shielded. She was protected. But I wouldn't back down. I posted everything, every document, every screenshot, every quote online. I told our story in a Facebook group, not expecting it to go anywhere. Within 48 hours, it went viral. The hashtag Justice for Hazel trended. Thousands of comments poured in. People were angry. Parents from all over the country sent messages of support. Autism and disability advocates reached out. Lawyers offered help. Karen's version of the story began to crumble under public pressure. And finally, the police had to take it seriously. A new investigator was assigned, someone from outside the county. Within days, they reclassified the case from dispute to suspected unlawful imprisonment and child endangerment. It shouldn't have taken public outrage to make that happen, but it did. Meanwhile, Hazel was still healing, not from bruises, but from betrayal. She asked me questions I didn't know how to answer. Why did Miss Karen say I was too much? Was I too loud again? Did I do bad? Every one of them broke something in me. I told her the truth. She did nothing wrong. She was never the problem. Karen's cruelty wasn't about noise or space or safety. It was about control, about intolerance, about power over someone who couldn't fight back. Hazel was targeted not in spite of her disability, but because of it. Therapy became part of our daily life. Slowly, Hazel started trusting again. Her speech device filled with new words. Brave, safe, mommy stays, no more basement. But even as progress came, so did shadows. She no longer wanted to sit on the porch. She didn't like closed doors. And she cried at night, not with loud sobs, but with quiet, breathless gasps, like she was afraid to be heard. We installed new locks. We installed alarms. We no longer opened the door when the bell rang without checking every camera. Our home, once filled with softness, became a fortress. Not because we wanted to live in fear, but because we had no choice. Karen hadn't just hurt Hazel. She'd taken something from all of us. Our sense of security, our belief in the decency of neighbors, the illusion that rules protected us. But there was something Karen didn't take. Our will to fight, because now the world was watching. And Karen, for all her power and connections and carefully composed lies, was about to face something she never expected. The truth, spoken aloud, shown in daylight, and justice this time would have no basement to hide in. It was a retired detective named Mason Greer who finally pulled back the curtain, a private investigator with a calm voice and eyes that had clearly seen more than most people should. He was recommended to us by a local advocate who'd read Hazel's story online. Mason had worked child endangerment cases for 2 decades, and when he sat across from me at our kitchen table, he didn't offer condolences. He offered clarity. If Karen did what I think she did, he said, sliding a notebook from his briefcase, this won't be her first time. And he was right. It didn't take long for him to begin uncovering a trail hidden beneath layers of HOA bureaucracy protected by silence and smoothed over by influence. The first thing he found was a second phone number connected to Karen, listed under a company name that didn't actually exist, Neighborhood Care Solutions, LLC. It was a dead-end business with no website, no clients, and no tax records, but it had been listed on HOA invoices as a community wellness consultant. She had been reimbursing herself under a fake company. Thousands of dollars approved by the board for resident interventions, behavioral mediation supplies, and sensory protection measures. I nearly vomited when I realized that was how she classified the lock she put on that basement door. Then came the HOA emails, obtained through a legal loophole that required the board to release communication records as part of a civil inquiry. Mason dug through dozens of exchanges between Karen and the board, and what he found was a disturbing pattern of targeted language. Karen consistently referred to Hazel as high risk, a disruptive sensory element, and once, chillingly, a liability that may need direct supervision if her caretakers continue to fail at community integration. One board member questioned her wording. Karen replied, "You may not be used to dealing with atypical neurodevelopmental cases, but these kinds of children thrive with firm structure and routine containment." She used the word containment, not support, not care. Containment, like Hazel, was a spill that needed to be cleaned up. But that was just the beginning. Mason traced Karen's previous addresses and discovered she had lived in 3 other HOA communities in the last 15 years. And in every single one, she'd served on the board or a wellness subcommittee. In one neighborhood in Arizona, a complaint had been filed by a mother of a child with Down syndrome, claiming Karen had harassed her family, reported them to child services for domestic disturbances, and told neighbors the boy was developmentally dangerous. The case had been quietly closed. No one followed up. In Colorado, a woman named Marissa called Mason back sobbing. She told him Karen had repeatedly filed noise complaints about her autistic daughter's therapy sessions, accused the child of screeching like an animal, and even posted anonymously in a neighborhood forum that the child's screaming could indicate abuse in the home. Her words triggered a child welfare check. The family moved within 6 months. Karen's pattern was clear. She didn't just dislike disabled children. She actively hunted families with them. And she did it with clinical precision, hiding behind HOA rules, weaponizing concern, framing herself as the hero fixing a problem others were too afraid to speak about. But the most disturbing discovery came when Mason dug into the security systems around her house. Karen had installed 2 hidden cameras, one disguised as a birdhouse facing the sidewalk where Hazel often rolled past, and another positioned inside her garage, pointing toward the basement entrance. When police subpoenaed the cloud storage, they found archived footage going back months. Some of it was just everyday life, people walking dogs, Hazel drawing chalk hearts on the sidewalk, me carrying groceries. But then there was that day, the day Hazel disappeared. The footage showed Karen walking calmly to our house around 2:15 p.m. while I was upstairs. She waved to Hazel, handed her something, candy, maybe, then motioned toward her porch. Hazel hesitated. Karen bent down, whispered something. Hazel followed. The footage showed Karen wheeling Hazel into her home. No force, no visible struggle, just careful manipulation, the kind only a child would fall for, the kind only a monster would use. Inside the garage camera, we saw her guiding Hazel toward the basement stairs. Hazel looked confused. Karen gestured toward the darkness, placed her hand on Hazel's back, and closed the door behind her. That's when the camera cut off. She had turned it off on purpose. Police had no choice now. The footage was irrefutable. They arrested Karen again, this time for unlawful imprisonment, reckless endangerment, abuse of a vulnerable person, and fraudulent misuse of HOA funds. The community that once backed her went eerily quiet. Some neighbors apologized, others avoided us altogether. But the media, they devoured it. What had once been a viral post became a full-scale investigation. News anchors calling her a predator with a polished mask, disability advocates slamming the system for failing yet again. The HOA board dissolved within a week. State legislators began drafting a bill called Hazel's Law, designed to prevent HOAs from interfering in disability accommodations or using pseudo-wellness titles without accountability. And yet, the twist that broke me most didn't come from a camera or an email. It came from Hazel. 2 weeks after Karen's second arrest, while Hazel and I were drawing in her new art room, she tapped on her tablet and asked me a question I never expected. Does Miss Karen hurt because someone hurt her? I froze, not because I had an answer, but because Hazel, even after everything, was trying to understand the woman who tried to break her. She was offering empathy when all Karen had offered was darkness. That was the moment I realized something deeper. Karen wasn't just a villain. She was the product of a culture that sees difference as disorder, that wraps cruelty in policy, that lets people like her rise through silence and position, leaving behind a trail of quiet victims too scared or broken to speak. But not us. Not anymore. Hazel's voice, robotic and soft as it was, had roared louder than any policy or power could have predicted. Her truth cracked through decades of hidden pain. And that truth was now unstoppable. The courtroom was silent, that tense, waiting kind of silence that feels almost holy. Rows of seats packed with people, journalists scribbling, neighbors whispering, parents holding photos of their disabled children in quiet solidarity. At the center of it all sat Karen. No HOA blazer, no clipboard, Just beige prison attire, hands cuffed in her lap, eyes dull, lips pursed in the same tight line she wore when she used to hand out policy reminders. But now her power was gone. No porch to stand on, no board to back her. Just a woman facing the truth she tried so hard to bury. I sat across from her, my fingers laced tightly around Hazel's, her small hand calm and warm in mine. She looked so different now, not just stronger, but sure. The weeks of therapy, of talking, of naming her trauma had given her something Karen never expected: voice. Not in volume, but in force. The judge called the hearing to order, and what followed felt like both a trial and a reckoning. The prosecution laid it all bare: the security footage, the audio recordings, the falsified HOA reimbursements, the pattern of harassment, the other families she had quietly abused across 3 states. Witness after witness came forward. A former HOA board member testified about how Karen manipulated meetings, silenced dissent, and encouraged special protocol for Hazel. The district attorney read from Karen's own emails, where she had written phrases like containment measures and risk reduction of neighborhood instability. But the moment that shook the room, the moment no one could prepare for, was Hazel. The court allowed a special session where Hazel could give her statement using her speech tablet. She was wheeled up gently to the microphone, the courtroom rising in respectful silence as she was settled. She tapped slowly, deliberately, each word echoing from the speaker in her robotic, clear voice. "My name is Hazel. I was not a problem. I was a person." Then, tap by tap, "I did not deserve the basement." A pause. Then, "She said it was for my good. But the dark hurt me. My heart still gets scared." Another pause, her finger trembling slightly. "But I am not broken. I am still here. And I am still good." Gasps rippled through the room. Even the judge wiped at her eye. Karen didn't flinch, didn't cry, didn't speak. She just looked at the table in front of her, like the sound of Hazel's voice was too much to bear. And maybe it was, because for the first time, everyone saw what she had tried to hide. She hadn't been protecting the community, she had been destroying it, one child at a time. The sentencing came swiftly. The judge's voice was firm and clear. This court finds the defendant guilty on all counts: unlawful imprisonment, abuse of a vulnerable person, reckless endangerment, fraud, and willful violation of federal disability rights. She paused, her gaze locked onto Karen. "Your actions were calculated, predatory, and cloaked in a language of order and care. But order without compassion is cruelty, and cruelty against this child, is unforgivable." She handed down the sentence: 38 years in state prison, with no possibility of parole for the first 25. Gasps, applause, and beneath it all, I felt Hazel squeeze my hand, not hard, just enough. Enough to say we did it. But justice didn't stop with the sentence. Hazel's story changed the landscape. Hazel's law, already in motion, passed unanimously in 3 states within months. It restricted HOAs from interfering in disability accommodations, required mental health evaluations for board members handling child welfare concerns, and opened federal oversight into any community-funded behavioral monitoring programs. National disability rights organizations honored Hazel as a symbol of resilience. News outlets ran specials. Schools invited her to speak through video. She became more than a survivor. She became a voice for children who'd never had one. As for us, we moved, not out of fear, but for freedom. A new town, a new home, a new porch where Hazel could sit under the sun with her therapy dog and draw chalk suns on the driveway without anyone watching with judgment. Our house was filled with color again, with warmth, and with trust that no matter what had happened, the world could change when enough people stood up and said, "No more silence." But most of all, we healed. Slowly, gently. Hazel still has hard days. Sometimes she still checks the basement door before going to sleep. But more often she laughs. She dances. She tells stories through her tablet about superhero girls in wheelchairs who trap the villains in their own dark dungeons. She signs her artwork now with a name she gave herself, Hazel the Brave. And she is more than I'll ever be able to explain. because she faced the darkness and she came out shining. It's strange how, after everything, life finds a way to stitch itself back together. Not perfectly, not without scars, but in a way that lets you breathe again. Months have passed since that day in court, since Hazel sat in front of a room full of strangers and told the truth that so many kids like her never get to say. She's different now, but not broken. Stronger, not in the way the world usually defines it, but in a deeper, quieter way. The kind of strength that comes from surviving darkness and still choosing to smile at the sun. We live in a new home now, in a town where no one knows our past unless we choose to tell them. The walls are painted in colors Hazel picked herself, soft purples, bright yellows, and a sky blue ceiling she says makes her feel like she's sleeping under the stars. Every morning, she wheels herself to the porch, Maple curled up at her side, and draws. Sometimes it's flowers. Sometimes it's superhero girls with capes and tablets. Sometimes it's monsters in suits, always defeated. We've built a different kind of routine here, one that includes therapy, homeschooling, and something we never used to have, peace. But peace didn't come by accident. It came through pain, through standing up, through refusing to be silent when the world told us to shrink. Hazel's story became a catalyst, not just for us, but for so many others. Parents from around the country reached out with stories of their own. Violations, discrimination, cruelty hidden behind HOA bylaws and concerned citizen committees. We started an advocacy group, Hazel's Light, to fight for accessible housing rights, to challenge policies that exclude rather than protect, and to make sure no family ever feels as helpless as we did that day on the porch. We speak at conferences now. We help families sue boards that try to silence their children. We've made it our mission not to be quiet, because silence was what nearly got Hazel lost forever. And in that mission, we found something we didn't expect. Community, real community. The kind that listens and lifts and learns. And through it all, Hazel remains our guide. She still has moments when she hesitates at doors, still sometimes wakes from dreams with her heart racing. But those moments are fewer now. And every time, she reaches for her tablet and taps out something steady like a mantra. I'm safe. I'm strong. I'm not alone. That last one hits me hardest because that's what this journey has taught me too. We are not alone. For every Karen in the world, there are 100 more people ready to stand beside the ones who've been pushed into the dark. I used to wish none of this had happened. I used to dream of going back to a time before Hazel knew what fear tasted like. But now, I hold her hand and realize we are not the same people we were then. We are something more. Something unshakable. Hazel didn't just survive the basement. She turned it into a platform, a voice, a revolution lit from within. And now, every time I see her rolling freely down the sidewalk, sun on her face, laughter rising without shame, I know this. Karen tried to bury her in silence. But Hazel became a storm. And she's never going quiet again. If Hazel's story moved you, if it made you angry, cry, or stand still in disbelief, don't let it end here. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to HOA Karen Shorts for more real, emotional stories that expose the cruelty hidden behind polite neighborhoods and gated smiles. Too many families suffer in silence. It's time we shine a light on the abuse masked as rules and concern. Backhand index pointing right comment below if you or someone you know has faced HOA harassment, disability discrimination, or community manipulation. Your voice could help someone else feel seen. We're not just telling stories, we're building a movement. Because silence protects the abuser. And stories like Hazel's, they deserve to be heard. Reminder ribbon, stand up. Speak out. Stay loud. HOA Karen Shorts.